Okay, well, I'm Margie Sable, and I used to be a programmer at KOPN long ago, from 1978 to 1981. I worked on, I was one of the morning air programmers. I worked with the Crystal Set Feminists to do the Moon of Artemis show on Sunday afternoons, which we rotated among the different members. And I had a show called The Brazen Hussy, and my name was, my radio name was Rosie O'Reilly. So I talked to someone, Vic Day, about my experiences at KOPN, but now I'm here with Al Tacker, and I met Al. I met you at KOPN when you were already here, you were already doing programming when I moved to Columbia in 1978. And we've just kind of known each other through the years, and here we are in 2022, and with our gray hair. And I'd like to know. I know you did public affairs shows, among other things, and I'd like to know how you got involved with KOPN.
Well, I've really kind of been interested in radio, and always fantasized that it'd be cool to be in the radio someday. And then when I heard about the New Wave Corporation trying to develop the station, I started attending the meetings. So I was here at the planning meetings, and I was really around right from the very beginning. At the time that we started, there weren't any air openings, but only the air openings came really quickly around here. People came and went and were sometimes dismissed without warning and stuff like that. So I think probably just 2 or 3 weeks after we went on the air, I was awarded the midnight to 3 a.m. shift on Saturday night, and it was kind of comforting because I knew that not many people could hear us with our 10-watt signal, and even fewer were listening. So I didn't have to be too nervous about speaking to a wide audience.
Were you doing public affairs, or were you playing music?
It was music. It was album rock basically at that time. One of the things that I've noticed is that we did a lot of things that weren't being done in the Columbia market. And Columbia was a very small radio market at the time. There were the 2 AM stations and a couple of top 40 FM stations, and KVIA, which was all classical music, and the Stevens station, which was inaudible more than a mile away. And so we did a lot of things that were being done in other markets. Or maybe, and we obviously did a lot of things that weren't being done that were really creative. But I think the things that I was involved in.
Can you give an example?
Well, the stuff you were worked in, the feminist programming, and but I mean, the stuff that I was involved in were all things that weren't being done in Columbia, and that included album-oriented rock music. For a long time, I had a Tuesday afternoon show called Free Lunch, and the free referred to kind of free-form music and a variety of folk, rock, pop. I did a lot of thematic shows. Once a month, I would go to the Historical Society and look up the newspapers from 10 years earlier and convey the news as well as the music, play the top 10 songs and other music from that era. And did a number of other thematic. I had a show that was all about time, and every song I played had some unit of time in it. So it was an opportunity to just do something different and creative.
Did you bring guests to your show for the music shows for Free Lunch? Probably not from the midnight to 3 a.m., but.
Midnight to 3 a.m. I knew that by like 2:30 there was nobody out there, so I've just put on Inagata-Vita or something very long and just let it run for a long time. But
how about with Free Lunch? Did you have any guests?
Not with Free Lunch per se, but later on with my future wife Mary Jo, we had a program called Monday, first thing Monday morning, and we brought in a number of different people, university people, political people, and we interviewed them. The kind of thing that after we had started doing that, KFRU started doing. And we kind of realized, they had a bigger budget and more opportunity to do things, and we kind of just dropped it.
So you had a good idea. They heard it, and they ran with it.
But we also had the Only Oldies show, old rock
I remember your old rock show.
And then there was a whole station that came on, and that's all they did. So, yeah, I think we did things that other stations probably heard and thought, hey, that's a good idea, and took them from us, and they had the bigger budget and more records, and so we kind of moved on and did something different.
I remember you, well, I know you were on the city council, you eventually ran for city council and you were on the city council here in Columbia, but before that you were doing public affairs programs and interviewing people, candidates and things like that. Right. Can you talk about that program?
Yeah, well, I ran for mayor in 1973 as a 20-something long-haired hippie, and I finished third out in a four-way race. I figured that was a victory. But after that, very shortly after that, KOPN started, and we broadcasted city council meetings, which eventually ended up, I guess, on cable TV. But again, I would have interviews associated with that, but pretty much we just broadcast gavel-to-gavel coverage of the city council. And then, I guess, stemming from that, we had public affairs, covered events, covered speeches. A couple of the people that we covered included Gene McCarthy after he'd run for president, and Joe Teasdale, who was the actual governor of Missouri. And so I guess one of the questions was, who are the most famous people that you've met in this process? And it's probably those two. But we also, there was one year when there were like 8 candidates for state rep, I think, and it was a race that Wendell Bailey eventually ended up winning, but we had all 8 of those candidates up here at KOPN. And
so that was really good public service for KOPN's listeners.
Yeah, it would have been the only opportunity, because nobody else is doing that. The only opportunity for candidates to get on the radio and for people to hear them.
It's kind of funny to think about that now, because you hear candidates on the radio all the time, but I guess in those days that not so much.
Yeah, I think it was something like 20 or 25 candidate forums for city council candidates this year, and when I was active politically, there were like 3 or 4, and maybe a couple times on the radio, but that was it. So again, I think one of the real strengths of KOPN was the willingness and the ability to innovate and do things that weren't being done.
I remember it a lot with music, that our mantra was, we play things that aren't played on other radio stations. And
that's for sure.
And I learned so much about so many musicians I had never heard of before I started working here. I guess you developed a lot of your skills through working at KOPN, is that right?
Right. I had no training and no skills and no education related to radio beforehand. So.
Do you think that was true of most of the programmers?
I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah. There were some interesting management styles in the old days. You would come up one time and your mailbox would be gone, and that was a signal that you were no longer on the air. Or you would go in for your shift and somebody else was there. I mean, this didn't happen to me, but it happened to other people. And it was, for a communication medium, there wasn't all that much internal communication in the early days.
How do you think the station has changed since the time that you were involved?
I think it's probably a lot more professional. I think there's probably more consistency in terms of the quality of programming and programmers, because we really were doing it from scratch, and just having to sign a release for this video, it's something we never would have ever
we never would have done, right? So we did a lot of things at the station, a lot of events and concerts and things like that. Do you remember a favorite event, or do any of the things that we did outside of broadcasting on radio stand out to you?
I was a stage guard for an Ozark Mountain Daredevils concert, and I was here and the speaker was here, and I think I still have hearing loss from that concert.
Was that KOPN sponsored?
Yeah. And, we had a lot of good people up here.
We had a lot of good people, yeah.
One thing that that was really out of character based on the rest of our programming was getting into sports. And there were the 2 AM stations, and one of them was broadcasting Hickman basketball and football. The other was broadcasting Rockbridge, and the station broadcasting Rockbridge suddenly said, "Now we're not going to do any sports anymore." And so I think it was probably Bill Wax who came up with the idea of, well, why doesn't KOPN do that, fill in that gap? And so I was part of that broadcast team, which included Tom Dorr, former Missouri, 7'1" Missouri basketball player. And so we were on that broadcast along with a couple other guys. But Tom went on to become the voice of the Chicago Bulls basketball team. And also I think he was a Southeast Conference broadcaster for quite a while. So he was one of the people that got his first professional experience here.
Yeah, and speaking of that, there's some other people that went on, that started out here as volunteers and went on to have careers in radio. I know Bill Wax did, became a national blues programmer. Can you think of other people that went on to do more radio in their professional lives?
It seems like I cannot remember the name, but the person that first did NPR's business show got his start here at KOPN, and then went on to initially start that show.
Yeah, there were a lot of journalism school students who came here to go to journalism school and then volunteered at KOPN. I think not Bill, but Brian Mann was one, and Jim Zaroli. I didn't interface with Jim Zaroli, but I knew Brian and hear him on NPR now.
The programmer that followed me one time during one of my shows was Georgianne Wheeler, who went on to marry Jay Nixon and become the First Lady of Missouri.
Right, she was a programmer here.
Broadcaster.
So how important was KOPN to you in terms of your friendships and circle of friends?
Well, Mary Jo claims that she thought I was probably okay to date because she'd heard me on KOPN. I'd never heard before. Of course, she told me that today.
Yeah.
But yeah, I a lot.
George had heard me too. That's funny.
A lot of my friends during that time period were people that I met here. And the interesting thing is, I'd go to a party there in late 70s, early 80s.
I remember those parties.
They weren't KOPN parties. They were just other people of our generation. And it seems like the major topic of conversation was always about what was going on at KOPN, who had gotten unfairly treated, who had been promoted, what kind of programming changes had been made, that kind of thing. But it seems like that was always the topic of conversation. I think we were really a major portion of the whole culture of our generation.
Well, that's a great way to close. I think I agree with that. It really was, it was a culture that existed here that, and almost a society,
It was almost the center of, I would say, of Columbia, but of Columbia for our age, and maybe countercultural, but not entirely. But I think an awful lot of people identified with KOPN and were very, very interested in it, very concerned about what happened here. I was one of the few programmers doing at least some popular top 40 music, mixed in with a lot of other things, because there was kind of that bias of, that we're alternative, we don't do that kind of stuff. And I did kind of mix some of the stuff that everybody else was doing here along with stuff that was on the radio more generally. Thought there was a way to blend that kind of stuff together.
How have you used the skills that you got at KOPN in the many years of your career since then?
I think I probably developed some more confidence in terms of talking in public, and that did me well through my career. One thing at the time that I started, you had to get I think it was a third-class radio operator's license.
Right.
Had to go to Kansas City and take the test, and the only real skill that I got out of that was walking over, and our tower was on top of Paquin Towers at the time. Was every hour I think I had to go over there at night and look out the window and make sure that light was on, so low-flying aircraft wouldn't crash into our broadcast tower. So that was a skill I learned. But I think more generally, just in terms of learning how to talk and talk to groups and be less nervous about doing that kind of thing. I think those were all skills I picked up here.
Well, thanks for your time and thanks for the memories.
Yeah. Thank you, Margie.